Okay, we're recording. All right. How do we embrace this new year of the Yin Metal Ox? A year of learning to thrive in the unknown. Welcome, everyone, to the Seasoned Leaders Mythic Moment with Misstangq, also known as Meng Yu to me. We've done a couple of these in the past just for fun and ended up realizing, geez, this is really cool. Especially since at the season leader, we're learning as leaders how to live and lead in a way that mimics, if it's natural and mimics the seasons and the earth. And so much of what you do, Meng, is tracking in your artistry and your divination, is also tracking the earth cycles and using it as a way to align our lives with what's happening in the external world. So lots of synergy here. And so today we're going to be here. We're back with Meng. Do you want to say anything about your? I know that you've been on here before, but I'd love to give you another moment to just share who you are and why you're here.
Yeah, I'd like to just start off by saying thank you, Kirin, for having me on here. It's always just such a pleasure and so much fun to get to do this. And I love that you are making this platform and this opportunity for folks like me to get to share some of my work, as well as, my thoughts regarding what is happening in the world at this time. So
yeah, my pleasure. It's so lovely being in conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely, with you as well. So just, a brief introduction on myself. I am an artist and also a diviner astrologer. So I work in Chinese astrology, and specifically the Bazi system, which is also known as the 4 pillars of destiny. And so, yeah, I primarily approach this work through the lens of an artist. I have teachers that are primarily within the Taoist tradition. So that's kind of my background and the larger context and sort of philosophical approach that I take to this work. But I would say primarily what I bring to it personally is seeing divination and astrology as a way to help us navigate an increasingly complex world and to learn how to better enact our co-creative power in the art of making choices.
Beautifully said. Yeah, me too, but in a different way. And I love that you refer to what you do as another pillar of your artistry, because that's really what I see also. And I think why your work and your ability to channel is so potent and so beautiful, and why you're here. One of the many reasons you're here. Okay, so the year of the Yin Metal Ox, year of learning to thrive in the unknown. I feel like saying that word already sets people off of it. Our relationship to the unknown is just not quite developed. And so I think that there's probably lots of questions and curiosity and maybe fear about what's coming this year, especially on the heels of this really, there's just no words to describe what we've experienced in 2020, and which was also a year of waiting, a year of limitation, the year of the yin metal rat that we also talked about last year. And you can visit both Meng's website and my website to get a forecast of last year and a similar conversation that we had to, if you'd like to. But yeah, this year of limitation and waiting that we coming out of, but really kind of wrung us out, moving into a year of the unknown. Let's break this apart a bit. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I want to give you the mic. I want to frame this a little bit in the sense that, as I was saying earlier, I love working with the Chinese Batsu system and your work and the I Ching, because it's so elemental and based out of the observations of the natural world. And that's so much of what we do here at the Season Leader and at Brownswell as well. And, I think one of the things that's often really helpful in the work is really trying to understand something that might be really complex, like a year of the unknown. How do you be in that? I think we can be really intellectual about that. But I think since it's, a lot of the wisdom around Chinese astrology is so earth-based, I'd love for us to paint a really visceral picture using the elements and nature of what this year is about. Like, what is the seasonal imprint of the year of the Yin Metal Ox? What are the elements associated with it? What are, the more tangible, visceral qualities and characteristics that we can expect and are being asked to embody?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a great place to start because we kind of need to backtrack a little and see how did we get to this theme of thriving in the unknown, right? And I love what you're saying, Kirin, about going back to the elemental root and looking at earth-based wisdom and earth-based cycles, which is really what so many alternative calendars, many different schools of astrology, that's really their gift to us, is providing us a more holistic context through which we can view time, through which we can place ourselves within larger cycles of time, and to create harmony between our internal time and the external time. So when we look at the Chinese astrology for this year, we have our second year of a metal year. So last year we had the Yang Metal Rat, and this year we're going into Yin Metal Ox. So the ox, many of us have associations with it as, being a work animal, right? So the ox is in the field, laboring, working hard. The ox is actually a yin animal in Chinese astrology. So it represents feminine labor, inner labor, hidden labor. So this is labor that is primarily focused on process and development and nourishment to reach completion. So it's actually likened, it's symbolized by the life cycle of pregnancy and gestation. So it's all this work that's happening on the inside. It's work that is developmental. And so in our hyper young, hyper masculine focused society, the ox's work is often overlooked. It's underappreciated. It's devalued. So this is one of the, aspects of when we look at the symbolism of the ox and how it relates to our modern times. We're looking at gestation, pregnancy, feminine labor. And then when we combine that with yin metal is represented by thin metal, soft, precious metal. And so metal is this super rough, raw material that's hidden deep within the earth. And to get to its, this beautiful, thin, soft state, which is also represented by jewelry and adornment, it needs to be refined. It goes through a pretty massive process of refinement to get to this thin, flexible, pliable state. So the theme of yin metal is refinement. So whenever there's yin metal, we're looking at subtle, mutable, more elusive layers of reality, more flexible layers of truth, more minute layers, sometimes paradoxical layers. So that's kind of how we,
Can I just,
sorry?
so by like the mutable, the more subtle layers, to just make it a little bit more concrete, are you referring to even maybe more of like the intuitive and like what we can't see, um, but need to slow down in order to feel?
Absolutely. So, you can also envision yin metal as like an antenna, right? So it's not only flexible and pliable, it's also highly conductive. So metal is a very conductive element. So it is also related to intuition, to receiving information that is non-conventional, non-traditional sources of information. So the theme
Like
of
the
what we're dealing
energetic.
with.
It feels like tuning into the energetic rather than like what we can visibly see and touch.
Absolutely. Yeah. The subtle layers of reality. And so, when we're in this time after this year of 2020, which actually, we had sort of this massive master class in just dropping us into the unknown, we're actually now refining our ability to be attuned to the unknown, to actually learn how to thrive in it. So, this year is really going to be about having a healthy relationship with the unresolved, with the incomplete. These are going to be really, really important skills to develop this year because we are living in a post-truth era of media consumption. We're living in an infodemic where there's so much information that it's a deluge. We don't know what sources to trust. We don't know how to keep up with all of it. And so when we are refining to ever more deeper layers of truth, it means that we have to live with complexity. It means that we have to live with being unsatisfied. And most of life is actually living in this state of the unknown, of the unresolved. And what we have to be really careful of is not falling into easy answers. And because we can't cope with the unresolved and dealing with feelings of not having closure. It's one of the things that I think is important to kind of as an image that will be helpful for us this year is to think of this as a very embryonic time, right? So we're back into being a fetus, being protected in the womb, that an embryo is really incomplete. We can't force the embryo, the fetus, to be born before it's ready. And so the magic of this time is really in that hidden state of hidden work, of learning to respect timing, learning to respect the mysterious, the inner blossoming, the awakening of potential that is actually unknowable. And so we're developing this inner attunement. And it's not the same as, as hiding intentionally. It's not the same as choosing ignorance. It's not the same as blocking out all external sources of information. It's just about developing sensibilities that are not subject purely, solely to external output.
Yeah, I love that. It's really interesting. I've drastically reduced my media consumption and social media consumption. It's not something I did very much of before. Actually, it spiked at certain times, especially as the pandemic was coming on and crazy things happening in our capital. But overall, I think I've definitely reduced my consumption in a lot of ways, and it's been really interesting having conversations with friends and colleagues and clients, who are, so many of the people who follow Barnes are change makers, and there's this desire and need to be in the know And you have to know what's going on, because our communities are being so deeply impacted by the pandemic, have always been impacted by, this like systems of oppression in our world. And, and I had to really, I struggled with pulling away, um, because it brought up this like, oh, how am I going to be a good activist? How am I going to be a good change maker and a leader if I don't know what's going on? And but taking that time away, I started to realize, I just started to realize all the other ways that we can know. I just
Mhm.
loved what you said about how it's not, I forgot the languaging that you use. Like, it's not about like cutting ourselves off and becoming ignorant. Like, the last thing I felt was that I was becoming ignorant. I'm like, I actually know too much, so much that it's paralyzing. And, and it cuts off my capacity to be really potent and show up for people in a powerful way. And so it's been really liberating and expansive, pulling away from the feed, um,
Mhm.
and then helping my clients do the same thing. I think we've all just felt this sense of, oh yeah, like there's so many other ways to access information, especially when we get quiet and we get slow and we minimize and become a lot more conscientious and discerning about when we let information in, how we let information in, how long we let information in for, and then how long we're taking time to then digest and integrate, so that we can receive good guidance and wisdom on how to act, how to show up. um, so I just loved what you shared there, and wanted to bring in a bit more of a concrete example and how it's like impacted myself and my clients. And I love, I want to go back also to this idea of the not being satisfied. I want to read a quote from the forecast that on the Yin Metal Ox year that you have on your website. Everyone go check that out. And it really struck me, and I was like, oh, people are gonna have a really hard time with this. You just said it, and I want to repeat it. And it's that the Yin Metal Ox year will be full of events that will leave you feeling more unsatisfied, not less. So I want to just repeat that one again because it's good. The Yin Metal Ox year will be full of events that will leave you feeling more unsatisfied, not less. I remember so I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, a mutual friend of ours, and she's going through a very not good time. Um, and I was like, hey, do you know it's the year of the Yin Metal Ox? Like, this year of thriving in the unknown. And I quoted this to her, and she was just like, I hate you. I actually remember she was going through something similar when we recorded our conversation on last year's astrology. And I remember sending it to her too, and she was like same reaction, where she's like, I know this is all true. I feel myself being called to do what the imprint of this year is. And I hate you. Like, I hate you for recording this, and I hate you for saying this, and I just hate you right now. I'm like, yeah, I probably you and so many people, you know? And so I just want to, I feel like there's a lot of folks out there who are probably like, great, great. And I hate you. So yeah, I guess I just want to like dig into this a bit, and unpack that a little bit. Like, hey y'all, I hear you. I hear you. We have not been raised in a culture, in a society, or we don't have a system that we've been taught that allows us to gracefully be in the unknown, to gracefully be in a time of waiting or in the void. Um, this is something we have to relearn, and we are being asked to relearn. And I know it's hard. And so, I think I'm just curious, like, what's coming up for you as I bring in that layer. So, yeah, I would love for us to have a conversation here about how we can actually still use the energy of last year to support us in this year of the unknown.
Yeah,
I
these
don't know how
are
to answer them
really
either.
great questions.
But
I
let's see what
really love
happens.
them because it is difficult, I think it's important to acknowledge what a tremendously harrowing time this has been for most people, if not everyone. And, I think it's important to, what we're being asked to learn, I think, is to be suspicious of our desire for getting what we want, for the parts of ourselves that desire things that are comforting, but not necessarily in our highest interest. So for instance, if we're looking at our relationship to closure and needing to tie everything up in a neat little knot, and to have our meaning making have a level of um, a level of satisfaction that is kind of self-serving, actually. It can really lead us to somewhere that's very far from reality. And so, what I think is really important in this time, even though being unsatisfied can be very difficult, the alternative can be much worse. We've seen an explosion of conspiracy theories, of fringe religions, cults, all sorts of ways of thinking that has led us very, very far from the truth, very, very far from reality. And, one of the things that I think is important to acknowledge is the amount of growth we've already done this year. If you were to look at yourself a year ago and think about the amount of actual development and everyday capacity that we've expanded in living in the unknown since the beginning of the pandemic, it's actually been quite massive. So, one thing I like to sort of image in this embryonic time of pregnancy is that the womb is protection, and that not knowing is a form of protecting us. Because if you were to tell your former self pre-pandemic everything that was going to happen, that at all the stores, all the shops, all the bars, everything was going to be closed. We're all going to have to wear masks. We can't touch each other. We can't hug each other. We can't be within 6 feet of each other. We're afraid that we're going to kill our parents, our children. Everybody's at risk. The most vulnerable people are at risk. We're going to have to negotiate every single relationship, be it a stranger, be it a family member, as if it was an intimate physical relationship. Who have you been with in the last 2 weeks? What have you been doing? It's like you would have fucking exploded. So to not know is actually a really important process of our development, where we are being protected by not knowing. And that allows for that process of slowing down so that we can develop what needs to be developed to meet the times. And the other thing I wanted to add too, when you're talking about our relationship to technology and machines, I think that's actually really important in this time of a massive kind of disintegration of our capacity for meaning making. Because all of our meaning making has been outsourced to machines, to algorithms, to our feeds. You know, that your phone alarm tells you when to wake up in the morning, if not telling you when bedtime is. And we are so ensconced in living inside in an artificial environment. We're so out of touch with natural cycles, cycles that are based on reality, that tell us, hey, the sun's out, wake up. Hey, it's dark, we go to sleep. You know, this outsourcing of our meaning making purely to machines and algorithms, I think has opened the door for us to have very far-fetched theories, you know, that are divorced from reality.
Mhm.
You know, this last year, actually, my partner and I have been involved in this land project where we've been stewarding 12 acres and we've been living full-time outdoors in the mountains for 6 months. And one of the greatest things that I've learned in that time is that being in touch with natural cycles gives your life meaning. Like, this is the real meaning making, is the rhythm, the definition, the articulation of natural cycles in nature, daytime, nighttime, and the seasons, lunations, phases of the moon that are tied to our hormones. You know, I was surrounded by things that were alive all the time. I always knew what phase of the moon it was in. I was beginning to be able to read time by looking at constellations in the sky, you know? And those are natural, you know, natural positive boundaries and limitations that make life significant.
Yeah.
You know, it articulates the time. And it can, you know, when you think about understanding time and how to, you know, align and harmonize your behavior, whether it's waking and sleeping, whether it's the type of labor you do according to the seasons, it also attunes you to, you know, ritual, to rites and sacred time, to know, you know, when are you at a crossroads? When is it time for a rite of passage? You know, these are the real meaning making vehicles that we have always had for thousands of years.
Mhm.
You know, I keep thinking about like creating this, I don't know, a meme or a t-shirt or something that's like biorhythms, not algorithms, you know? Those are the
Yes.
rhythms that are tied to reality, that are tied to our real experience.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if anything, I completely, you know, agree with you, Kirin, and totally am so excited about the work that you're doing, supporting people in unplugging. You know, if you find yourself in a worry spiral, if you find yourself being just completely taken for a spin in the unknown, go outside, go touch some earth, you know, like we have access around us to nature, to the natural environment. Go to your park, your local park, you know, get off the algorithm.
Yes.
That would be, I guess, my advice for this time
I
of
love
thriving
where
in the
this
unknown.
yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. I love where
No,
the
go ahead.
conversation is going. This is just, you know, it's so funny that yeah, my work is earth-based. Like that's like I identify in the last year I've been identifying as an earth-based healer and leadership coach. And it's so funny to me when I have these conversations. I'm like, you know, I think because I'm in the role of interviewer or whatever, and I'm really trying to um and I'm channeling the worries, you know, the pain points and the tenderness of the people I'm holding and wanting to support. And so, you know, doing that, I'm like, yeah, how do we do this? And I'm like, oh my God, like the earth, duh. Like, and it's just so funny to me that that always ends up coming in last in the conversation. And I think part of it is that even as for me, as someone who is modeling and supporting people and getting back into plugging back into biorhythms rather than and unplugging from the algorithms. I love that. Definitely make it a meme. Even though I'm someone doing that, I'm also doing it. You know, I'm also in this deep process of relearning that I am of the freaking earth and
Mhm.
not like, I had this, I actually was on someone else's podcast a week ago, and I was like feeling really compelled just to like paint this narrative of, when we say we're of the earth and we're of nature, or at least when I was doing this initially, first with my work, I realized I was still, I'm like, I'm going out to nature and I'm recognizing that I'm the water and I'm the soil and I'm the whatever, the elements. And I realized that I was still doing it from this very human centric and like human supremacist place and energy where I still felt superior. And it was just natural. Like it wasn't me, it was after doing it enough times that, again, tuning into that subtle energy where I was like, oh, at first it felt really good. And then I was like, oh, there's something that feels not good about how I'm doing this. And I realized that I still had this separation. Like I'm going out on walks in the earth, like out in the earth. And I felt that as, yeah, there was still this separation and me like, I'm going here so I can fill back up for myself rather than what made me really ask the question of how do I be here recognizing that I'm a small part of this earthly universe and that when I go out on my nature walk, even when I'm like out in the city, when I'm with the earth, even when I'm in my home and I'm connecting, like I am, yes, I'm going to the earth to receive again, but that I need to also think about my larger role in it all and also what am I giving back as a result. And I don't totally have language for this yet. I think it's still developing in me, but I just in the last like couple of months, I've been noticing this shift where I'm like, oh right, I'm actually doing this to humble myself
Mm.
and to remember my true place in this web and that humans are nowhere near the center. We're really important and significant, but just as significant as the microorganisms and the trees and the moon and the sun and all and in some ways even less so, like I really am just like, yeah, the sun's definitely more powerful than I am. And I love your invitation to go back, like step outside. I'm living, so I actually, some people know this, some people don't, but I had to move back home after 10 years of living away and being on the West Coast, like steeped in nature. Even the cities that I lived in were surrounded by mountains and waters and trailheads, and now I'm back in an intense urban jungle, and there's nature here too. So, I guess I just want to say that for those of us who, didn't get to like live on 12, 20 acres of land or, aren't living in California or whatever, on the coast, uh, I can't tell you how much the like small urban parks, and even just like the tree outside my house and that had like how much salvation they've given me and perspective. And yeah, like just that has felt being out in nature and observing it over, I walk a lot and I go and sit with the earth a lot. And being in that process has taught me so much. Like that is where I'm finding truth and where I'm finding reclamation of my power and ability to be in this time with ground and strength. And so I just want to second what you were saying.
Yeah, I feel like you're really speaking to the power of yin, from what you were first saying about really humbling yourself in nature. The qualities of yin are receptivity, openness, humbleness, that we can't actually invite things in, we can't receive, we can't listen unless we humble ourselves. And it really made me think about a word that has really been kind of my mantra recently, which has just been to allow.
Mm.
The opposite of allow is to resist, right? And I think there's been a lot of, for me anyway, strong kind of political associations with that word resist. And it has been very much kind of enwrapped in my makeup to want to resist, to, as even as a political act, as a personal act, to resist in order to exert power over feelings of powerlessness, over institutions that have the power over model.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really liberating to sit with and play with the word allow.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, allowing, it's not the same as condoning. Allowing is, it's positioning myself in a state of humility, like what you're talking about, Kirin, sitting with this sense of allowing life to touch you, allowing yourself to become tender enough to actually receive the world. And that tenderness to me requires immense bravery, especially in this time, especially when every impulse and reaction I have actually is to resist. And, that I can feel that rigidity in my body. And in a practice of allowing, receiving, and opening, it is a practice of much more, way more courageousness than any kind of like yang resisting energy.
The effort.
So that's something, yeah, that I would invite folks to also find ways to incorporate in a yin year, where we're learning the power of yin, the power of that humility to actually resource us.
I loved what you said about that tenderness that allows us to feel allow life to actually touch us. That's really beautiful. That's really, I think that I feel like we are in a dance with that ebb and flow so deeply in our collective right now. I'll just share again personally, like even in this conversation, so funny that yeah, you're one of my best friends and we have these conversations all the time. But then the moment I'm like, hey, let's do this thing for, Brownswell for the season leader, I sent you like an email, like, let's talk about these points, and spent 3 hours yesterday writing notes, it was really fun to do. So I'm really glad that I did it because it was really fun to get into the material. But what it also did was it developed this oh, I know what's going to happen tomorrow. Here's what I want to have happen. And yeah, I told you, even this is me being super transparent, people. I was in such a tizzy getting ready for this call. And when we first started, I was like, Mug, I feel nervous. And even just, yeah, my interest sucked. I can feel viscerally how from when I started, the the yang energy was there, you know? And then as I started talking with you, I was like, oh no, I'm just having a conversation with my best friend. And I love this. And I just could feel my body starting to soften and be like, I don't care about like, I literally don't even know what's written on my paper anymore. Because what's here right in front of me, like what you're sharing, and then what it's inspiring in me, and like the dance that's happening here is what actually is so warming. And like all the knowledge is right here, you know, and I feel that softening inside of my body. And I think that's kind of how like life goes, you know. We have these moments where we've been conditioned to be like, let me know, let me prepare, let me, you know, and that's good. But then can you like also soften to let the dance, the aliveness, the unknown, the thing you cannot prepare for, that is
Mhm.
actually only going to show itself when these two energies come together, right? And can you surrender to that and let that speak and move through us? Super beautiful, you know. Such, and when we can do that, just so like I feel so good right now.
Yeah, that feeling of goodness too is contagious, you know, when we allow ourselves to be open, to be tender, to be soft. That's something that can permeate. That's something that I'm sure people who are listening feel that too, you know, and it's that ability to allow the magic of the moment to happen. You know, we're just receiving it. We're just, that's what makes yin so powerful. You know, in the I Ching, yang energy is imaged as like lightning bolts. It's
Mhm.
the the bolts of creativity like flashing down from the skies. But even with all of that creative power and energy, it can't become anything without the earth to receive it, to
Mhm.
ground it.
Mhm.
So in a time when we're surrounded by so much tension, so much spark, so much energy, so much um, actually confusion, an overloaded airwaves, the best thing we can do is become an energy of grounding.
Yeah.
And that requires receptivity, openness, allowing the moment to come alive, to speak. You model that so well, Kirin.
So do you.
It's contagious when you do it.
So do you. You really helped me do it. So we do it together, right? That's the whole
Yeah.
thing. Like we're not doing it alone. I think that's the other really big thing that I want to share in this conversation. Like, how do we be in the unknown? We do it together. Like I cannot. I'll probably get emotional as I say this. Like I am nothing without you. Like just thinking back on moments this year that, you know, where I did feel the rigidity come up and like lots of unknown, you know, like the personal stuff I've had to go through this year. And yeah, you helped me come back to ground so many times. And so, like, who are the people in your life that help you channel that spark? And then, yeah, and I guess the other thing I just want to say there is when we think about getting support, not just thinking about our human supports, you know, like I feel like the last several years, my life has felt so much more enriched and I felt way more resilient because I really do see the earth as like one of my best friends. And my ancestors are I have such a deep relationship with them now. And my, you know, non-human guides that whisper to me, and my dreams, and um yeah, just like all these non-human aspects of the lived experience, the stars, the moon and the sun, and yeah, just really starting to break that barrier of like support comes in human form. And so especially in a time when we also can't reach for our human supports as much as we normally do, we can't be with each other, you know, and we get Zoom fatigue and we don't want to talk on the phone anymore. And some of us are, you know, our social circles are falling apart because of this pandemic and are needing to be rebuilt. So, you know, that can feel really debilitating, but it's been so liberating to break down the idea that, like, oh, yeah, support just comes from humans. Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's like the human
absolutely.
support is just a small, not a small piece. It's like equal piece of the like larger puzzle of support, that web of support around me, around you, around us.
Yeah, I think, as human consciousness continues to evolve, we're continuing to peel back layers of understanding how much the self is actually relationship. The self is defined actually through relationships. And you're absolutely right. That's everything from kinship actually to looking at our larger systems of kinship. I think what has been very toxic in our modern Western civilization is this ever shrinking model of heteronormativity and nuclear families. It's taking kinship into ever smaller myopic forms
Mm.
when, if you look at every indigenous culture, there has been traditions of ancestor worship, of calling the plants, the animals, our brothers and sisters. Years ago, if people remember, we had a movement of the 99% versus the 1%. But if you look at the planet, to animals and plants, humans are the 1%, and
Oof.
I
Yeah,
I love.
can you just like, I just got like so many chills when you said that. I just want us to feel that for a moment. That like in relationship to the earth and animals, we are the 1%.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we're learning how to have integrity, not not integrity in this individual perspective of being whole just in of ourselves, but evolving our understanding of integrity to actually mean to be integral in all of our relationships. And that includes all of our brothers and sisters, everything that is alive on this planet, and this is part of that, new model of change that I think the year of the ox is presenting itself with.
Yeah.
We're looking at the hidden processes of change, what's underground, what's beneath the surface, what's hidden, what's developing, acknowledging all the work that stands behind, people like us sitting and standing in front of the screen, being able to speak, being able to have this conversation, all the hidden work that has gone into cultivating and resourcing and taking care of us so that we can have this moment,
Mhm.
and to be able to acknowledge all of that requires this new model of change that is not sudden, that is not violent, that is not turbulent. It to be truly revolutionary, we're inviting in a way of transformation that is slow, stabilizing, that is integrative and inclusive, that not only cares about outcome, but also what really lasts through the process. In order for revolution to have lasting impact, we
Mm.
have to put our roots down.
Mm.
And those roots are what puts us in relationship with everything else, right? The roots are what spreads, what holds us together with everything else. And it's also hidden too. You know, roots are underground. It's not the trunk, the tree that's sprouting upwards that's like, hey, look at me. It's the slow stabilizing, reaching out to all the others. And those others include our ancestors. Those others include our, you know, plants and animals, the earth. So, you know, the ox is a earth sign. So we're really diving into this earth wisdom, having a geologic perspective, which means our sense of temporality is changing.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of things that, you know, with the year of the rat last year, it really kind of shocked us, put us in the frying pan, and now we're allowing it to cook. You know, this is the simmering, this is the juicy, difficult, complex, messy stuff that we're now allowing to bubble, to develop, to become something. You know, the rat is the seed of conception. It's that moment of inspiration. What follows conception is pregnancy. You know, and then what we have to look forward to next year is the year of the tiger, which is birth. So you can't rush to the birth canal when you're not ready, you know? So we really have to take advantage, really see the opportunity of this time to have this sacred protected moment so that we can be really ready for the moment of birth.
I feel like we all need to talk to our friends who are pregnant right now. You know, you just like have conversations with our pregnant friends, because I mean, you know, and also like, you know, bring them food and things like that too. Don't just like, let's not make it transactional. But, or just imagine, you know, I'm like, oh yeah, like, what would it be like to imagine yourself being pregnant? Like, regardless of your gender, we all have sacrums, creative, you know, like wombs. And yeah, could we exercise our ability of empathy, like our empathic capacities, and imagine holding life inside of your body and how you would have to move and how you'd have to change the way that you move in order to, you know, like make sure that your body is a home for this thing that you are birthing. Because, you know, I kind of love that you mentioned that like next year is supposed to be year of the tiger, year of birth. And I'm a little bit like, no, don't tell them. Because I feel like sometimes what we do is like, oh, like I can't wait for this year to get over and the next year's the year of the birth. But the thing is, if you don't align with this year, your birth's going to be real janky. You know what I mean? And I think that's what we see.
Nobody wants a janky birth.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, yeah, like sure that the birthing will happen and the energy will be there, but if you haven't actually honored this moment, the preparation that it requires, and like how to, yeah, like that if you haven't gestated, then it's going to be a really difficult birthing process. And what you birth will probably need to be like tended to. You'll have to, you know, kind of thing makes you think of like Mercury retrograde, like, you know how, and Mercury retrograde is when you have to slow down and you're like not starting new things. And if you start new things, then you're probably gonna have to go back and redo it. And you know, we still keep doing anyways because we're just so used to it. And yeah, I've been there. I've had to like I've been bit by Mercury retrograde many times, and because I wasn't paying attention to, yeah, I wasn't aligning with the forces and with what I was being called to do, and just trying to push an effort, the thing that I wanted, my desires, like you were saying earlier, you know. And yeah, it just kind of made things even more uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. The one of the themes I will speak to with the tiger is that tiger is all about power. how to source, how to express, how to enact power. And if we don't learn to collaborate with the power of the unknown, this year, we are not going to step into a year of power with true, holistic power.
Well,
You know,
and likely end up abusing power,
yeah.
right?
You know, one of the things I, as a thought exercise, I like to do with myself, you know, we all know how problematic religion is, has been historically, continues to be, but I like to play with this idea of a religion of powerlessness, because we
Ooh,
often
I
go
love
to
that.
religion to escape, to go to religion out of the fear of powerlessness. But what would it be like to make powerlessness our religion? To exist in that level of surrender, where we're not giving our power away, but to be with power that can't be taken away.
Yeah.
And you know, we often experience powerlessness because we've been convinced that power exists only outside of ourselves. So this year is a really great opportunity to be connected to power that is inherent to your existence, that is your birthright, that is the power of your aliveness.
Yeah.
You know, if anything, that would be my ministry.
I love that. I freaking love that. I actually have been writing a lot about that, and we'll be sharing like in my newsletter around this theme in the coming months. Just because we've been steeped in so many incidences where we literally have been like powerless, you know, to do what we normally do this year. And you know, I think it that experience and having to guide again my clients through being okay with that. Like I just, you know, and again also in my life, like there's so many incidences of needing to face my powerlessness in my transition back home because it was a lot of circumstances out of my control, and you know it's related to family and caring for family and crisis, on top of a global crisis. And you know, I think when you're in moments like that, you can complain and whine, and I definitely did that. Don't get me wrong. You can complain and you can whine and really feel bad, and you know, again, there's nothing wrong with that. But you know, I think I've been in this cycle enough times, and you know, my commitment to living in a good way for myself and others also makes me be like, okay, if I'm really struggling through something, then I'm at some point I will ask myself the question, okay, there's got to be something here, you know. There's got to be something to powerlessness I don't understand yet. There's got to be a place for powerlessness inside of this larger life experience. And, you know, and I remember actually taking this class where the teacher said something super powerful where he was basically like, we are really understanding this year how difficult and uncomfortable it is for us to face our powerlessness.
Mm.
I was like, yeah. And but you know, and that statement to me, like the way it hit me is like, oh right, yeah, like that statement inherently holds powerlessness as useful, as having a place. And you know, just made me think of like power and powerlessness also as it started, like I kind of went on the thought experiment of like, oh, what if I thought of power and powerlessness as like the yin yang dynamic?
Yeah.
What happens then? What happens to my paradigm if I start to
Hmm.
recognize that they're two halves of a whole, and actually and that inside of those two entities and energies is also this dark light dance. And that's been really powerful to, yeah, it's been really, I guess, the other word I would use outside of powerful is liberating again. It's been very liberating. It's like this experience that was creating so much contraction and limitation in an oppressive way, then broke open, and created a sense of expansion and of liberation, of curiosity, of I get to dance here. I get to learn something I didn't know that's going to help my roots sink even deeper. And that was really cool. And I just want to say one more thing there that every time you talk, I'm like, oh, I really want to say this, as you've been exploring and sharing with us just the importance of geologic time, the lightning bolts then being received by the earth, the need to slow down and have roots and really be in gestation so that we can develop roots and be grounded. That whole line of thought, every time you would come back to it, it just makes me think of the fact that in my work over the last many years, what I've realized and seen and felt so deeply, this is not a hit on anyone, I just want to say this. Like, what I've really noticed as a pattern is that I know so few people who are actually deeply rooted and grounded, myself included. Like, I really, I really feel like one of the huge charges and invitations that we are being asked as a collective is to remember that we are earth beings, and reconciling with the fact that there is earth time and geologic time and what it means to live that way, and that can only happen if we're deeply rooted. Like, we are being asked to really tend to our roots, to remember what do roots mean? What are they useful for? How do you grow them? How do you anchor them into the earth? What nourishes them? How do you continue to tend to them always, even as like lightning bolts come through? How do we live from our root? Like, I've really been playing with this idea of the rooted visionary. We, I think, really uphold in our world the visionaries, the ones who have like the really lightning bolt ideas, and just, yeah, and even the way that we honor and admire, models in our world, and this is in this very lightning kind of process way, like on Instagram, and like just the whole like celebrity fandom world, is there's such a lightning kind of energy, electric, high upper energy. There's very little that's like actually grounded around it, and there's a place for that, but I think we're being really called to develop our underworld and our lower halves and our downstairs selves, and um and to honor and appreciate, yeah, the underdogs, the oxes.
Yeah, that question of rootedness is really, it's important for us to develop practices around it.
Mhm.
I think of what comes off the top of my head is, one of the most immediate ways to have an experience, to experientially understand cycles, natural cycles, and earth wisdom, is to garden, to
Yeah.
put your hands literally in the dirt and in the earth. And what has been really kind of hopeful for me during the pandemic is that so many people began gardening, that seed banks were running out of seeds, that people were, if they didn't have access to soil outside their home, were planting, um, doing potted gardens. And, that's a really speaking of earth and material way of putting something into practice and into experience. Another way to get rooted is to get rooted in your heritage, into your cultural practice. You know, almost every indigenous culture has a creation story of people coming from the earth, whether they were made from clay or came from caves or were grown from plants like corn or taro. You know, there's a reason why we all have this collective mythology of being literally children of the earth itself. And, you know, one of the symbols of earth in Chinese astrology is not just this yin, this receptive quality, but also that earth represents the center of all things. You know, that the center of all of us is the earth. And so if we can go back to our cultural understanding, our way of our having a cosmological understanding of where we come from, being of the earth, being children of the earth, that is another way to get grounded. And then also to have a creative practice too, that the earth receives the power of creativity in order to manifest it. So in our consumer culture where we don't make anything anymore, what is one thing that you can make? You know, to think about, oh, I'm missing a button off of my shirt. Instead of going on Amazon to go buy it, maybe I can pull up a tutorial and learn about how to make a button out of clay, out of a piece of wood, or, you know, to make the things around us rather than to consume them is something that we all can learn to do a little more. And that act of creativity is something that grounds us, that puts us into the inherent power of earth to manifest.
Yeah, I love that. I think even I've been doing this thing with a lot of my clients who are doing a lot of Zoom for their work. And or just like where the nature of their work, you know, just because I do a lot of work with leaders, and so there's a lot of intellectual work that's happening, and it's very top heavy what they're having to do. And so I kind of made this up, but I'm like, I think it works. You know, so to play with it if you end up using this, but I have this like 2-to-1 ratio. I'm like, okay, for every intellectual thing you're doing 2 things that are bringing you back into your body. Whether that's even like, you know, okay, I had this meeting and now I'm taking time to like foam roll and or go on a walk and get outside in the earth. And, you know, I want to acknowledge also, I also love that the fact that so many people started gardening this year. I didn't know that thing about the seed banks. That's cool. And I think that those are really creative acts too. So like cooking and gardening, making your own things. I think one thing I realized over the last many years is that anything that we can do with our minds, even if it's connecting with your ancestors, so like if you're reading about your ancestral lineage or like creation stories, how can you play that out in your body? How can you move it? Could you draw it out? And I do this all the time with my clients, where as much as we will explore something through conversation, we will always take time to also then explore it on paper, to explore it through movement, to explore it, you know, really ground it sensorially and through acts that get us to move our body. And then I'll often give them homework to then also do that at home, so that it's not just staying in this realm. And it also, I find that energetically, it also helps just like dispel the energy. If there is a lot of energy and the like sparks, the electricity around a charge around something, then doing the process of then cooking or playing something out really helps take away that, just smooth out the charge. Another thing that I've been really loving doing lately is actually, it's winter. Where I am, I'm really loving looking at the winter scene behind you. Is that wintry? I don't know, but it looks wintry. It looks really cool.
I'm actually not sure what
Yeah,
season.
I'm like, it actually might not be winter, but it has a lot of winter colors. Anyway, so it's winter here. I have this like new online winter course, and we're exploring the agitations of winter and how to be with it, be with discomfort. I think winter is a natural time where a lot of our shadows show up. All the things that, we think we're all good and golden, and then the winter comes and you're like cursing and everything. You're like, oh, maybe I'm not as patient as I thought. And oh, that thing makes me angry. And so, there's a lot of work to do around that. But one thing I've been doing is actually shadow theater. So when I have a really intense emotion or agitation, I kind of get curious and I'm like, okay, like what's the character in me that's coming to life right now? And I get to know it a bit. So I do that, through my mind or reflection. Sometimes I'll write about it. And then yeah, it's kind of fun. Like I'll let myself like dance, either like dance it out or like move like it, like just give it a moment to express so that my home becomes this theater that it gets to be the center, it gets to have a show. um, and that makes me think also just about the idea of inclusion, like doing that helps me not cast away these like difficult experiences I'm having, but to actually welcome them, give them voice without having it like blow up and take over the scene.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really powerful to be able to find ways to embody those practices in a playful way, right?
Yeah.
Living in a year of the unknown, one of the biggest aspects of how we thrive is through play,
Yeah.
through being in touch with the freshness of life, when we humble ourselves, allow ourselves to be open to not knowing. The next thing in line to that is that you're like a child. Everything is fresh, everything is new. And when we can experience life from that perspective, it imbues an aliveness to our experience. And that's something that I think, as we get more and more in this sort of toxic, whether it's a political, social, economic environment, that's something that's really missing. And for myself personally too, I think one of my biggest challenges, both on a personal, but also I think on a collective level too, that is a challenge during this time, is
Mm.
just getting out of this paradigm of moral supremacy. To
Mm.
stop thinking of everything in terms of right and wrong, and to embody, what, like you're saying, this radical inclusivity that is based on nature. That in my experience of living outdoors, nature is not peaceful. It's not even harmonious. It's full of catastrophe.
Yeah.
It's full of disaster. Like, speaking of looking at a geologic history, the history of this planet is violent volcanic activity, glacial activity, explosions. Nature is this full of complex tensions and contradictions. And
It's
so
so cool.
and so, if you look at it from that lens, it is radically inclusive because it includes catastrophe, as well as the wonderful, as well as just the strange. And these complex tensions are self-adjusting. They're generative, they auto-generate, they're self-sustaining. So in that inclusivity of all the things, it creates a natural balance.
Mm.
And to me, that is the true meaning of sustainability, not to weed out, the bad, but to be radically inclusive, to create and collaborate with whatever presents itself, to
Mm.
have that attitude of let's play, and this is something, one of my favorite astrologists, um, Carolyn Casey, who's also an elder, um, her definition of magic is a willingness to collaborate with anything.
I
And,
love
and
that.
that's magic, that feeling of, yes, let's play. And again, it's not the same as condoning everything, it's, you have to acknowledge disaster when
Yeah.
it happens, but you can also say, what can we make of this?
Yeah.
What can we do with this? And so to me, nature is like the opposite of cancel culture.
Yes.
It's really hubris to think that you know what to reject. That's what I mean by moral supremacy, is that you think you can determine what is wrong, when all things, good and evil, right and wrong, all have a place on this planet. Everything rests on this earth. So who are you to say what doesn't belong in this world? So I've been trying to do this practice. It's been very difficult. Of stop calling disasters, catastrophes as bad or wrong, but to actually call it suffering. To not call racism, for instance, racism is not wrong. Racism is suffering. Child abuse, child molestation is not wrong, it's suffering. And so when we reframe it with our languaging, our understanding, we stop the witch hunt. We stop blaming, we stop acting through the prosecuting, we stop hunting for a perpetrator. When we call things as they are, as suffering, then we acknowledge the pain, we acknowledge the hurt, and then we make space for healing.
See. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it allows us to see that everyone is a victim. Perpetrators are victims of victims. And that's how we get out of a victim mindset, is to not get stuck in this idea that our suffering is special, that it is some unique suffering, but to acknowledge the greater pain and hurt so that we can invite the healing that is necessary.
Yeah. I wondered if we were going to go here in the conversation, and we just went there, and I love it. Like, is this going to happen? Yes. I love that. And I think I just want to reframe for people, because I could even feel inside of myself, like the tension come up when you were like, racism is not wrong, it's suffering. And I'm like, ugh. I'm like, oh, I know other people are probably like, ugh. And I so appreciate your bravery, and you're courageous in naming that. And as I continue to listen to you, what I'm really hearing you say is, wrong is a social construct. It's something we've crafted and we've created and put as a label on certain things. This is right or this is wrong. This is duality, this constructed duality that we've created, that we use to see life through. I mean, it's so deeply ingrained, the right, wrong thinking, the black and white thinking. And what I hear you saying is something that's actually more in service of truth. Like, what is racism? It's painful. It's suffering. And I do that in my, like, I'm just thinking back to, like, oh yeah, like when I found my work starting to become more powerful was when clients are talking to me about something, and again, we just have a natural tendency, I think, like you said, it's a practice, a natural tendency to be like, this happened to me and that happened to me and this was wrong and that was, and to stop and be like, what are you feeling? What does this feel like? And I feel like that's what you just did in this moment. You're like, what is the feeling of this thing that is rampant and so just, and like, yeah, it's painful. This is painful.
Mhm.
Racism is painful. It's suffering. That you orient it into it to it in such a different way. I think it elicits such a different way of like, well, what do we do here? So if someone is hurting, what do you do?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm trying to find what is the most helpful way to frame something so that we can get to work.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
And when we have moral supremacy, when we say that we end the conversation by saying that this is bad and wrong.
yeah,
But when we look at what is deeper, what
yeah,
is, racism is a symptom. Like, let's not get it twisted.
yeah,
Race is something that has been used to manipulate rage.
yeah,
So what is the deeper issue that is happening here? And we'll never get to work to healing the underlying conditions if we just stop the conversation at
just
what is the
stop.
worst thing that we collectively decide on is happening right now. Well, racism is the worst thing. Let's find the perpetrator, the racist. And then that ends the conversation,
Yeah,
right? But we're not looking at what is so causing such a sickness, such a toxicity, such a brutality and separation amongst us. What is the illness of our society right now? We can't get to that conversation if we don't first acknowledge the hurt. I'm not saying that racists and people who are on the receiving end of racism have the same kind of pain or
yeah,
any sort of equal pain, that even an idea of fairness and equality on gauging pain is even possible.
yeah,
But if we can't acknowledge that suffering exists in everyone who is in a systematic, institutionalized vehicle of hatred,
yeah.
then we can't get to work on healing that.
I think I also needed, it's nice to have someone who, yeah, there's just, I feel resonance in my body. I mean, I think feeling so deeply how we are all suffering right now, all of us.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that suffering, it has different qualities. And I hear you. I think maybe we're afraid to go there and to acknowledge that sometimes, because we think if we have this blanket statement of we're all suffering, that then it clumps us all together, and that's not true. It's like, no, we can say that, and then we can be curious about how does this play out differently for different communities, for different bodies. you know um, it's not the same, and we also don't have to figure it all out right away. Like, you start where you are, and you start with the people that you're most connected to, and tune into that first. We don't have to figure it all out first. And um, just makes me think about, I'm thinking a lot of things right now, but right now what's emerging is, again, throughout many points in this conversation, um, this idea of being in the unknown and what it requires, slowing down, rooting, being in our bodies, um, having our support systems, knowing our support systems, acknowledging support systems outside of the human, centering the earth again, geologic time, all of that. Like, as we embrace that, as I've embraced that in my life, as my clients have in their lives, as we have in our friend circle, I've just noticed how it kind of pulls us towards the local, towards the small, towards what's right in front of you, and it's making me think of something else that's in your forecast that you have written out on your website about like attend to the smallest possible thing. And I'm not sure if this is what you meant by that, but just everything we're talking about, it's that it's just, there's just this very visceral, resonant um, thought emerging of like, oh yeah, all of this is calling us towards like what's right in front of us, and can we tend to that with such deep care and integrity and intimacy, such intimacy, um, and trust that that's and like that the threads that will grow out of that, the roots that will grow out of that will be enough, will help us recognize what's the next step, and then what's the next step after that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to end on. What are the strategies for getting back to the bigger picture, essentially? For me, it's we get so myopic identifying and policing what's wrong that we lose sight of what are we actually trying to get to here. I don't just want to live in an anti-racist society. I don't want to just live in a world where everybody is wearing masks. I want to live in a healthy world.
Yeah.
I want to get back to health. And, that is the biggest question of our times right now, is how do we get healthy in like the broadest sense of the word, in our society, in our culture, in a pandemic where we are politically, economically, socially, and culturally in this hyper toxic and poisoned state. The most radical thing you can do is emanate health, emanate healthy body, healthy mind, healthy spirit. And it's, speaking of power, we have to have our eye on the bigger systems of power, but we also have to know, where do we have the most power right now? Where do we have the most power in changing our behaviors and changing how we relate? One of the thinkers that I love to listen to, this media theorist, Douglas Rushkoff, he recently had a talk where he said that it's really hard to do the right thing right now, but it's actually really easy to do many right things, which is what I hear you speaking to, this hyper local mentality, the hyper local spheres of power that we actually exist in, which is that, culture is created by people. Be good to your elders, be good to your neighbors, be good to strangers. Every act of kindness is something you can do right now that can shift culture.
Yeah.
So it actually comes down to these very simple things. And it just so happens that being simple in this way requires an immense amount of fearlessness right now.
Yeah.
We're scared. But if we can just do these simple things, we'll start to see things shift. We'll start to see things emanate around us. And I think that's where we start.
Yeah. I love that.